what are the approaches and principles that are sensible to adopt when we have a rapid change like this going on?
Your optimal choice may actually be to go and play in a playground that no one else is playing in.
What can we learn from the history of innovation that serves as a useful grounding truth?
You need many, many experiments because you
Yeah.
can't know what's going to work yet.
The principle that perhaps underlies these approaches to times of change that we've been touching on around the edges, which is, so I went to UX Brighton on Friday.
Oh, nice. How was it? I would like to go, but
Yeah,
difficult with all the children here.
yeah, right. Um,
It
I
was all
took
about
one.
AI.
It was, yeah, I took one of my kids with me actually. She's old enough now.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool. How
yeah,
did you get on?
yeah, no, great. We sold a load of books, had lots of cool conversations, and yeah, lots of it, lots to chew on. Um, but I sort of did get this slight sense of a theme that was there but unacknowledged, and the theme was we know this is going to change how we work, and everyone is kind of scrambling around for some sensible predictions, sensible frameworks to make sense of the mess.
Yep.
But I sort of ended up feeling that that ground truth, which is we don't know,
Yep.
or some things will remain timeless and some things won't, was sort of unacknowledged on the day. And I'm doing a talk in Romania in a couple of weeks about facing that uncertain future. So I've been digging into, okay, what does that actually mean for organizations and even culture and society, right? If it really is as big as some people say it's going to be, what are the sensible principles, positions to adopt when you're facing a time of change?
Yeah, which is interesting. And one of the first things that springs to mind is imagine you are a mobile phone manufacturer in 2006. So the
Mm,
iPhone doesn't exist yet.
yeah.
And what you are asking to do is say, well, let's imagine how we should price our App Store offering in 5 years' time. It
Yeah.
doesn't compute as a question you can even ask.
No.
And
No.
that's the challenge I think that we're facing when we're looking at if you tr when you're looking at the adjacent possible, you know what's possible right now. You can see one stepping stone away.
Mm,
Fantastic. We can work with that. But if you're trying to see beyond that one next stepping stone, you can't know, which is
yeah.
upsetting, isn't it? It's upsetting to people who need to know what the vision is before they can make
Yeah.
any moves, you know.
Yeah. And I think that there's an awful lot of people, I hope I'm not one of them, who've traded on that uncertainty, right? And trying to kind of help people navigate it. And I think there are uncynical approaches to that, and then there are cynical kind of, or not even cynical, but perhaps overreaching, hype-driven
Yeah.
things that are being said and done in self-interest, right? To gain
Oh
investment
yeah. Oh
or
yeah.
or to
Well,
build a career. Yeah.
there's a reason that the big consultancies are also called the merchants of certainty.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
And there's
Yeah.
a reason why they sell the same deck to every company.
Yeah. Indeed.
This
Yeah.
is uniquely tailored for you and your needs. They've changed the name.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this price at, I don't know, an Accenture, and then this price at McKinsey, but it's basically all the same thing being sold over and over again.
That's it.
Um,
Yeah, but it's the nature of what we're interested in, isn't it? How do you then
yeah.
manage? How do you invest? How do you work
Yeah.
when you can't know what's coming next?
Yeah. And I think in a way, what I've been musing on is that that pace is changing, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think in startup and product land, we're always trying to make sense of this uncertain future and poke at it and do something with it and maybe craft it a bit.
Yeah.
But then we reach the current point where you have a leap like what some of the things we've seen recently, and you get that kind of future queasiness. Like, that's maybe not the phrase, but that sense that, like, oh, wait a minute, like this is much deeper. is it that different to the way things change when they're slower? I don't necessarily think so, but like you're always facing the same fundamental problems, but that pace forces you to act differently or accelerate
Mm.
certain ideas or approaches because you can tell the ground is shifting faster.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there's a difference in pace, but there's a difference in the quality of the uncertainty as well sometimes.
Yeah,
And taking it back to, because looking ahead is difficult. We don't know where we're going to get to. But if we take it back to that, you're imagining how you're going to do your next mobile phone
mm,
from 1996 through to 2007. Mobile phones were obvious. It was
yeah,
feature competition. It was incrementally improving things with WAP and other little
mm,
features. And the next version of Snake, Snake 2 came out. Ooh, this is amazing. But within the market of mobile phones, it was pretty predictable who the market
yeah,
leader was going to be. It was Nokia. So the people who already had a big market share continued
yeah,
to have a big market share. That's what happens when the market is like that.
yeah,
Then you get this shift. And from 2007 to 2009, boom, everything is thrown up in the
yeah,
air. And now you can't predict anymore. You can't know what's coming next. And everybody
yeah.
has to scramble or die. And Nokia never came back from it, you know. And instead, Apple took the market.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this is a side note or not, but have you read The Humane Interface by Jeff Raskin?
Yeah. Zoom World, I remember that.
Yeah, right. So the seeds of that core interface and that innovation had been thought about for, I don't know, more than a decade or two
Yeah.
before it was technically possible.
Yeah, he was writing that in the 80s, wasn't he? And
Yeah,
have you seen General Magic, the documentary about
yeah,
it from
yeah,
Apple?
exactly.
Because they tried to
Yeah,
make an iPhone
yeah,
in the 80s when they couldn't do it.
yeah, indeed. Was it 80s or 90s? I don't know, I can't remember.
80s or 90s, something, yeah. It was
Yeah,
a long time ago.
somewhere around there. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like that time when um, the ideas are just not matched by what the technology can do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, have you come across Ken Stanley, The
no.
Myth of the Objective? Okay, you're gonna like Ken Stanley. So
All
he
right.
talks about, we mentioned it slightly at the beginning, stepping stones. And
Yeah.
the iPhone was possible when you had enough stepping stones ready
Yeah.
that the next leap to the iPhone was, well, you put these together and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
done. And it wasn't trivial. There's the story, we could go into the story about the keyboard and how that
Yeah.
nearly killed it. But
That was the biggest innovation, but what people don't realize. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, just
It's
getting
like,
that to work.
yeah. Yeah. What's it called? The Ken Casida book. Have you read that one?
I have talked about it extensively and I've got it in my
Yeah.
pile to read.
Right. Yeah.
Ken
Creative.
Kosienda, isn't it?
Yeah.
Creative selection.
Creative selection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have been musing on what what is it like if we put actual predictions aside
Yeah.
about what AI is going to do, what approaches are sensible for organizations to adopt at this moment?
Cool.
And
That's a really good question. So, how big is the organization and what sort of budget do they have? Um,
yeah.
so going back to Ken Stanley, just talking about he is an
Mhm.
AI
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
researcher who he was making a thing called Pick Breeder. He's got a few really good talks, and he was on a podcast recently where his ideas have become really nicely crystallized. And you know, when somebody talks about something for several years and it gets really tight, and they're just
Mhm.
powering through information very, very quickly. It's quite exhilarating to listen to.
Mhm.
He talks about this idea of the myth of the objective and how when we set an objective and then try to optimize our way towards it, if the objective is modest, one stepping stone away, great.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
usually we know how to do it. We're just trying to figure out that one thing, that one keyboard. That's enough
Yeah.
to get us there. Nothing else was going to kill it.
Yeah.
But if you go beyond one stepping stone, if you don't know the stepping stones to get to the objective, it's probably going to be deceptive. And you're
Mhm.
going to feel like you're getting closer to it, but actually you'll never get there, because the
Mhm.
way you're going to get there is round the edges somehow. There's going to be some surprising thing that you weren't expecting. So if you think
Mm.
about Charles Babbage, he died a laughing stock because he was
Mm.
obsessed with making the computer.
Yeah.
And they've made his differential engine and it works for what it is, but it's not a computer like we know computers.
No.
If you were in Babbage's time trying to invent a computer, you would not invent the vacuum tube. You'd be seen
No.
as sick for doing that.
Yeah.
But it was only because vacuum tubes were invented separately that we were able to then create computers later.
Yeah.
You can't know the stepping stones you're going to need up front. And so Ken Stanley's argument is, if it's a modest objective, set the objective and go for it. And that's what
Yeah.
most companies need to do, because you've got a governance
Mhm.
requirement that you need to know what you're investing in. But if
Yeah.
you want to genuinely innovate, you can't set an objective. You have to just follow
Right.
interestingness and
Yeah.
follow what expert people find interesting for its own sake, and accept that you can't know that good things are going to come out of it.
Yeah.
But you increase your chances of finding interesting stepping stones, which increase your chances of finding something that's interesting that you
Yeah.
can then set an objective for.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the fundamental challenge. And how do you
Yeah.
balance those, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few thoughts I've had there. So one is, I think Stephen Johnson had a very similar metaphor. He talked about opening doors. I think is his book The Myth of Innovation. I can't remember what it is.
That one, I think, is Scott Birkin.
Oh yeah, no, not. He's got a book about the history of innovation, and I can't
Yeah.
remember the title. Anyway,
Yeah.
he talks about very similar things to the stepping stone. The idea that actually innovation is a series of doors opening, and this is why we get the simultaneous innovation effect, right? Where
Mm.
two people put the transistor together with something else, and then another door opens. Um, the other thing that strikes me there is underpants gnomes,
Yeah.
right? Because a little while ago, I was asked to consult on a very long-term strategy in a startup, and it was incredibly ambitious, multiple long-term dependencies, doors opening, right?
Yeah.
And I looked at the middle section, the fuzzy middle, and I went, underpants gnomes, right? Uh, as in the South Park sketch where the gnomes have steel
Step
underpants.
one, collect underpants.
Step
Step
one,
two,
collect underpants. Step two, question
step
mark.
three, profit.
Step three, profit. Yeah.
Worth a
Um,
link to it.
yeah, it's my favorite kind of analogy for weak or uncertain strategy. And
Yeah.
the reason I'm pulling all this together is that I don't use Twitter very much anymore, but
Same.
I occasionally look at it. And the other day I actually replied to something, which was there's this Dutch guy, Peter something. I can't his Twitter handle is Level SIO. He's sort of one of these solo
Oh, I know. Yeah,
runners. Yeah.
levels IO. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And
famous solo
he
creator type.
Yeah, yeah. And he was really romanticizing Xerox PARC, right?
Mm.
And he put up a picture saying, get in a room with your friends and innovate for years and build the future.
I was going to bring that up as another good example.
Yeah. But at the same time, he was kind of, I think in the thread, missing the point of what you said, right? Which is you can't put pressure on that situation,
Hmm.
right? You can't go, right, boys, make some money. It doesn't work like that, right?
Well, this is why I use the Xerox PARC example when I'm talking to
Yeah,
people. And when I'm talking to myself, reminding myself,
yeah.
the management hated everything that was happening. Every
Mm,
innovation that the Xerox PARC teams came up with,
yeah,
the mouse, the graphical user interface, the printer,
yeah.
all of that, management hated it and tried to kill it all. And it
Mm,
survived in spite of the company,
yeah,
not because of the company's plans,
yeah.
which
There's
is
that
a
one guy who was
terrifying thing to realize.
yeah, there was that one guy at the heart of it who was essentially I think the structure of Park was in its early 70s heyday was one guy whose name I've forgotten, and then everybody else was flat. And he was essentially protecting them from all of the stuff from above, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's how it worked.
Yeah.
And there was no pressure to productize or commercialize. And that's sort of Brett Victor's recent point about his project Dynamic Land, which is no one is doing that kind of long-term, or very few organizations are funding those kind of fundamental things. The way that investment money and the corporate world has changed is that it's become much shorter term in its outlook, much less like the academic world where you know, give a bunch of people some resources and they sort of create their own little playground of interests.
Yeah.
And then occasionally you pick something out like the GUI or the mouse or the
Yeah.
printer.
Nice.
Uh,
And you touched on a metaphor that Ken Stanley
yeah,
uses as well, the playground. And
yeah,
his take is AI,
mm,
treat it like a playground. What you want to do is go there with people who like playing in playgrounds and then
yeah,
see what you can do with it. Not
yeah,
having a goal in mind yet, not having an objective. The
yes,
objective is just go and play in the playground.
yeah, exactly, yeah,
Stuff
yeah,
will emerge. You can't know what it's going to be.
yeah,
But you then need somebody. I chatted with a friend from an old company. You need somebody who's going to run interference for you. You need somebody who's
mm,
going to keep the monsters out of the playground, I suppose, or keep the
yeah,
corporate interests out of the playground. Because once you've got corporate interests in there, it's not a playground anymore. It's
yeah,
a boot camp,
yeah,
and you're not going to get that creativity happening.
yeah. Your window will be shorter. I have an uncle who worked on electron microscopy in the very most
Awesome.
advanced kind of field, like the very, very like lowest point of visualizing the universe, right? Like how do we see atoms, the components of an atom, molecules, and so on. And he told me that the physicists who work at that level, it really is a playground, right? You give them resources, you throw food at them, but you don't make any demands, you don't make any kind of like that's the way their brains just need to work.
Yeah.
Because people thinking at that level have to be absent of all of the stuff that we normally deal with in organizations. So
Yeah.
all it's like if I use the metaphor of throwing food at them, it's like a buffet. Occasionally they'll cook something really nice, but most of it is absolutely dire. And so you're just kind of tasting it, taking it away, and then doing something with it occasionally.
Nice. And you
Yeah.
you get that this touches on, I suppose, theory X versus theory Y of management.
Yeah.
Theory, one of them is one where people have to be motivated to get anything done. And the
Yeah.
other is, look, these people are gonna be digging into this world of physics, whatever you do. You can't
Yeah.
stop them from being interested in it. So just let them get on with it and see what comes out.
Yeah.
Make sure that they're fed and clothed because they're not very good at that.
I think that might be literally true in the case
Yeah.
of these folks.
Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of people have lamented with the world of scientific research and how
Yeah,
funding happens is you're expected to say what your outcome is going to be before they'll give you the money.
yeah,
And so you can't do that. Well, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. It's just going to be interesting.
yeah,
Doesn't get you the money, which is a problem.
yeah. I have a brother-in-law who went from science in Europe to North America, and he said it was 10x. All of a sudden, he was spending 80% of his time justifying his existence.
Wow.
I believe it was Higgs of Higgs boson fame who said, I wouldn't have been able to theorize what I did in today's academic environment.
Yeah.
And
Which is terrifying, isn't it?
it is terrifying. And I here's a weird speculative thought. I actually think academia might be, in a way, a sort of proto-model of a form of utopia. Let's say a post-scarcity model, right? In the
Mhm.
sense that, what is it? Well, it's a bunch of people who are spending their lives noodling with something they're interested in, and it kind of doesn't matter whether it has utility or not, right? It's closer to art than it is to science, technology, business, you know?
Yeah.
Um, in its sort of humane values, right?
God,
So
yeah. And there was a time when that was also workable as a business model.
yeah,
Well, yeah. So in the, I'm guessing from the early days of academia. They clearly got funded. It worked as a
Mm,
model to create these places of learning and experimentation and research.
yeah,
And but now you talk to academics who work in that system, and I don't think I've heard anyone who doesn't agree that something's been lost as it's become
yeah,
more commercialized, more about pumping students through.
yeah,
And as you got this, again, it became outcome oriented, it became measured on
yeah.
specific qualities. You've got to now get up the league tables. You've got
Mm,
to pump through enough students. You've got to have the cachet in order to have people want to come to you, etc.
yeah.
That then has broken what works. Well, broken's not right. It's
Yeah, and
shifted how it works in a way
yeah,
that may
and
not be what we want.
arguably led to the replication crisis, right? In psychology, maybe, right? Like just
Yep.
lots of incentivizing people to have these seemingly amazing breakthroughs, and actually a lot of it is House of Cards.
House of Cards. Yeah. And have you read Experimental History?
No, I have not.
That's a lovely blog by a guy called Adam Mastroianni, and I think you'll like it. He's one of those people who writes so well it's almost annoying. But
Mm,
he's talking about his plan is to make science houses, and
yeah.
he is in academia doing he calls psychology experimental history.
Mm,
So you are creating history sort of scenarios and seeing what do people do.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a really
That's nice.
nice
Yeah,
idea.
yeah,
And he talks about how little progress we've made in psychology. And we've
yeah,
stacked up lots and lots of, oh, that's a bit counterintuitive type
yeah,
things. But
yeah,
that's all. And if you look at physics, we did a lot of that for a while, but it was only when there were certain fundamental shifts, the paradigm shifts, that we
yeah,
actually made massive progress. There are people complaining at the moment in physics, we're going to need a paradigm shift because we've got
yeah.
stuck. Um, but
Yeah, I've seen that essentially there's been no real proven progress for, well, essentially since Einstein, right? Like since 100, almost 100 years ago.
yeah,
I mean, it's funny because there's more people and more money being thrown at the problem than ever.
yeah.
So what are we missing? Is it that the technology can't show us like what the universe is really about? Is it that somebody like Einstein is just, once in a few hundred years for that level of insight?
Do
Yeah.
we not have the stepping stones in place for the
Yeah,
next
exactly. Yeah.
leap like that? That's
Yeah.
the next question,
Yeah. Yeah.
which in turn means more playgrounds, more
Mm,
more wild crackpots
yeah.
maybe tinkering who aren't in the official system. But at
Yeah.
the moment there's so many crackpots with so many crackpot ideas you can't possibly look through them all.
Yeah. Bit too noisy. So let's come back to the one of my original thoughts because for entirely selfish reasons I need to develop them a bit for my talk. um, like I've been thinking about what would I say to organizations about how they should approach whatever change it is we're going through right now? And I want to be clear that I think AI is a bullshit term. Like
Mhm.
Marvin Minsky called it a suitcase word, as in it needs a lot of unpacking.
Yep.
And and,
I
and
use the
actually,
suitcase word thing a lot because yeah, people
yeah,
put whatever they want in the suitcase and then
yeah,
assume that everybody else is taking the same thing out and they're not.
right, exactly, yeah, and
So let's get more precise then. Are we
yeah,
talking, obviously, there is this situation with generative large language models,
hmm
which are used to do lots of stuff in the background already.
hmm
But the public face of it, the thing that people see a lot of, is the chatbot style interaction, conversational interactions,
yes,
which, depending on who you talk to, are revolutionizing everything and it's making people way more effective and efficient. And you hear that from some people with, I'd say, little evidence that that's actually happening.
yeah,
And then you hear other people saying, well, this actually can't do what the proponents are claiming it does on a
yeah,
technological, scientific level. It cannot do it. And it's way more expensive and wasteful than would even be worth it if we could achieve that.
yeah,
So there's this complete uncertainty in is this actually a workable technology or
yeah.
not?
Yeah, I think that's the when you have this much hype and the explosive growth of products that are quite revolutionary, it's just very difficult to sort the noise. And that's, I think, what I was trying to do in this, what I'm going to try and do in this talk, right, in a couple of weeks, is say, okay, let's just pretend I have no skin in this game for a moment. What positions do you adopt sensibly?
Yeah.
So things like looking at, I don't know what it is, history of innovation. What patterns do we see that give you some sense of how you should adopt a position when you just don't know what some of those outcomes are going to be? So I'm interested to know what you think about that. And we can talk about some of the working principles and things I've been thinking about it generally in mind.
Love it.
Or,
Yeah, I'd be keen
yeah.
to hear your sort of take on this because it's the fundamental question. And I'd say there's a layer beyond just there is what is the best strategy for a company to take?
Mhm.
And then there is what is the strategy the company can take, given that they have
Mm,
funders who are demanding that they do something with
yeah,
LLMs, for
yeah,
instance,
indeed. Yeah,
in order to keep getting their money.
yeah. Just
It's
slap AI on it is the current, unfortunate position that a lot of startups are
it
finding
is.
themselves in
Yeah.
to
So
get funding.
then,
Yeah.
and going, I mentioned before, I think we started the recording, there's a chap called JP Castlin, who I think you'd also enjoy
Hmm.
reading. His
Hmm.
newsletter is Strategy and Praxis. I've done a couple of guest posts there. It's really nice.
Thanks.
But he talks about what to do when you don't know what to do. And he told me a quote from a Japanese CFO, which I might have mentioned to you before, which is the deliberate strategy is what we tell to the shareholders. The emergent strategy is what we actually do.
Yeah,
We talked about this running interference idea as well at Xerox
yeah,
PARC. There was somebody who was the ish umbrella.
yeah,
And then I mentioned a friend of mine from the past who he stayed at a company working, doing innovative stuff and in the playground. And he
yeah,
was able to do that because his boss would once every few months go to him and say, look, can you just cook up some nonsense for me in a slide deck? I'm going
yeah,
to go and share all this wild creative stuff that you're working on. It's not what you're really doing, I know, but we just have
yeah,
to keep everybody busy. That's kind of
yeah.
so
So
how do you
yeah,
present the idea that we're doing this crazy stuff, but then in reality work in a much more pragmatic,
yeah.
exploratory way?
So I have a friend, Martin, who in the Netherlands, who is a former founder, and he literally said, what I realized with the startup game is that my relationship with my investors is effectively a different business, right?
Interesting take, yeah.
And he hired somebody to treat it as such, right?
Wow.
Like we do the real work over here. You go tell stories, let them speculate about what the company is worth, sell them, a vision roadmap that is
Yeah.
sort of kind of true, but never really comes true, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's yours. You're selling narratives, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I thought
Constructing
that
a
was really
believable
interesting.
narrative, and
Yeah.
then don't let the people who are doing the real work think that that narrative is real.
I would say the biggest mistake I've seen with founders is not being able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
Really, really, really like if anybody's looked at my LinkedIn profile, they might be able to tell which specific company I'm talking about here. I won't name them. Um, but yeah, I realized after, I don't know, 6 months of a year of working at this particular company that like that vision and that sales pitch was treated as though it was real.
Yeah.
And for everyone on the ground, we were like, we have much more prosaic things to solve. It's not that we disagree with that thing, but like, please don't tell everybody that that's coming in 6 months because
Yeah.
it's not.
Or even in 2 years. And if it is
Yeah,
coming in 2 years, then there's no way for us to connect up what we're doing today with
yeah,
that. There's no way across it. I call that the vision chasm, and I've written a bunch of pieces
mm,
about it.
yeah,
And it's rife. It's in so many places. And I
yeah,
think you've put your finger on something. It is you have to play the narrative game in order to keep the company running.
yes,
But if you start believing your own story,
yeah.
then you're
Oh
in
God.
trouble.
Yeah, absolutely they did. Um, and I suppose it was a kind of perhaps semi-deliberate strategy of like, book them and they will come or something. Like people will just follow me. But then if you don't have that more fundamental understanding of what the actual challenges are. So at the same company, I met somebody who is very much bleeding edge of AI, who will tell you now, like he actually loathes the term, right?
Yeah.
Like he actually really gets disgusted by the dialogue that's happening in public around this stuff because it is so divorced from the reality.
Yeah. Because there
I
is some incredibly cool stuff that can be done,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's not the stuff that's everyone's going on about.
No, and I think this is why. So the working title of my talk is Reliably Unreliable. Well, that's the beginning part of my talk title.
Nice.
I've yet to kind of come with the second half. And
Was well, we were at UX London and saw Maggie Appleton's talk, didn't we?
yes, she
Which
didn't. Yeah, go on.
relates to that, I think. There's that
Yeah,
sense of, yeah, AI or AI, horrible term. It doesn't work the way computers work in our minds.
that's
It's
right. Yeah,
really different. It's reliably unreliable.
yeah,
How do you then work with it in order to make things that you can predict enough or that are not
yeah,
dangerous enough to actually
yeah,
use?
yeah. It's this clash between determinism and non-determinism,
Yeah,
and we've not really been used to computers operating like that. I think we've always had that tension between the world being non-deterministic and like trying to design a form that maps to people's realities when they fill it in. It's
yeah,
like, no, I don't fit in this box. We've
yeah.
always had that tension of the non-deterministic world and the deterministic world, but I don't think we've ever really had computers working that way. And here I'm going to show my age. I remember on Tomorrow's World, which for those who don't know was a BBC show about the future in the
Epic
80s,
show.
90s.
Loved it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I remember, I think I'm going to say late 80s, early 90s, somebody introduced the topic of like fuzzy logic, right? This
Yes.
idea that like the future of computing will be around probabilities and fuzziness and not necessarily around hard x plus y determinism.
Yeah.
And so I
Because I think
guess
at that time we
mm,
tried to build expert systems that were
yeah,
basically big decision trees
yeah,
and found that, well, they don't actually, we can't encapsulate
yeah,
knowledge in that way, except
yeah,
in a vanishingly small number of cases.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, how can you make the fuzzy knowledge
Mm,
work?
yeah. So, coming back to our sort of potential major questions, which is what are the approaches and principles that are sensible to adopt when we have a rapid change like this going on? What can we learn from the history of innovation that serves as a useful grounding truth? And what can we say about determinism versus non-determinism and those kind of that messy sphere? I'm not going to say the sphere of AI. um, and also, I think to add to that, I am going to talk, I think, in my talk about this idea of the conversational interface and what its ideals are and what the metaphors are and how it may be misleading us. I think we're all feeling that to some degree, right? Like it's just a little bit misleading, and yet so many organizations are saying, let's double down, as they
Mhm.
have done in the last 10 years. I mean, the idea that we will talk to our computers for everything is not exactly new. We've been going through a sort of waves of excitement about that in the last
Yeah,
years, with hints of it going even further back.
yeah. Well, I remember making uh, trial software for Alexa. You could make
Mm,
those Alexa scripts and all that sort of stuff.
yeah,
And when you come down to it, you realize that most people, most of the time, use Alexa for about three things.
yeah,
And that's it. You don't have a conversation with it. You don't,
yeah,
it's weird. There's no, it
yeah,
comes to the concept of affordances, doesn't it? What are the
yeah.
psychological
So
affordances around something?
yeah, so let's talk about that and
Yeah.
why that is happening, and also like what is the summary of the operating principle. So again, I'm not wording this very well yet, and maybe that will come in the next couple of weeks, but it's something along the lines of the ideal interaction is not always conversation, right? And I think that is underestimated, misunderstood. But let's talk about why that was happening with Alexa. So what's your understanding of why that interface actually resulted in some fairly shallow use cases? Like why do you think that was happening?
Why was that happening? This is taking me back in time a little bit.
Mm,
I think you touched on something earlier, which is computers are fundamentally deterministic.
hmm
And I'm going to think back to the company where we were literally playing with Alexa scripts and
hmm
things like that. We had a few people in the company who just wanted to play with it for its own sake.
Yeah.
And there was no funding for it. There was no strategy to use these. It was what happens in lots of companies. You've got loads and loads of sparks, but no
Mm,
oxygen to help the
mm,
sparks that catch grow. They get squashed quite quickly.
yeah.
In this case, the sparks should have been quashed. I think it was never going to take off as the thing that was going to be amazing. Just
Yeah.
didn't work. So
Yeah.
we had a form where you had to enter 3 years of address details because it was to do with credit checks and things like that, which
Right.
anyone who's done a credit check, 3 years of address details, marvelous.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when you enter your address and the computer goes and looks it up in the database and can't find your address?
Yeah.
This happened to, I think, 8% of people who tried to fill this out, which
Yeah.
is, that's a lot of people, actually, if you think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
thousands or millions of people were trying to fill this out. The address database was never up to date enough. It didn't know about the real world enough. And if we couldn't match you in the database, you couldn't get a credit check and you were
Mm,
out. There was
mm,
no way to move through it. And a lot of computer-based forms are like that. There's no way to fuzzy your way around it. Once
yeah.
you had been credit checked and we could get data about you and understand more about, I suppose, your real world context, although credit scoring is
Yeah.
largely nonsensical, if you actually look at it and work out how it works, it's awful. But it's a way of knowing something about the real world and something about behaviors.
Yeah.
Once we got all of that, we could then put your data into a fuzzy risk model, which was an early model. It was, well, proper AI. This was classic AI,
Yeah.
machine learning type model.
Right.
And this was the company's real special skill, I think, was their
Yeah.
ability to model risk differently from the rest of the industry. Then we
Yeah.
could do really clever things with you. But obviously, a load of people were just not getting through it. Now,
Yeah.
would a conversational interface help? It asks you for your address, you try to
Right.
talk through it. It's actually giving you even less feedback, even less
Mhm.
information at every stage about what's
Yeah.
happening and whether this is working or not.
Yeah.
So I think there's something in that. It's just not.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's kind of what's a good analogy for something that pretends to be more than it is? I'm trying to think. Um, yeah.
A Silicon Valley founder?
Yeah. So the way I started to think about this was the expectations of conversation as a kind of proxy for intelligence are hundreds of thousands of years old, right? As
Yes.
an interaction mode, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Which is
so it,
exciting if we can do it.
yes,
And I think, yeah, if you imagine then you're trying to tell your address to a human postman,
yeah,
and he looks it up in a database and can't find your exact address, but you
yeah,
tell him the address, he can find your address.
yeah,
That's okay. But a computer drone, which can't locate it,
yeah,
is stuck, can't go anywhere.
yeah. And in that old world of Alexa sort of faking a non-deterministic uh, intelligence, um, you had to kind of scaffold and shape the conversation. It was like it was the appearance of a real conversation, but it wasn't really. You're doing lots of hacks and tricks to kind of make it feel as natural as possible, but it absolutely wasn't natural and very
No,
logic driven.
it was more like a phone menu, wasn't it? When you phone up your company, you have to press three to get through to this, and you just want to
Yeah.
speak to a person.
And the job of design was to basically make it feel natural when it really wasn't. And so
Yeah.
I think the core problem with the idea of the conversational interface is that the expectations don't meet the reality. And I think that's still true, right, with ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
And the LLMs, even though they can keep talking and they do seem to be much smarter than and certainly freer, right? Like you can keep talking, you could keep asking it questions, it will generally understand you as you keep going with it.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think from the back, you can code the LLM to prompt certain things, to push for
yeah,
certain information, can't you? You've
yeah,
got a little bit of control, some strings to pull,
yeah, yeah,
but there's a limit to that.
yeah. And I think that when the smartest person I read about this problem was Benedict Evans.
Hmm.
He talked about at one point about the thing with a conversational AI is it's sort of U-shaped in a way, right? So with a small number of use cases, the utility is high. With a medium number of use cases, it's terrible. But what's always being sold and the vision and when it would actually be useful is when it can handle almost anything
Yeah.
that you throw at it, right?
Yeah.
And so
And
the
people are
reason,
selling the dream like
yeah,
your AI
yeah,
agent for you, like a
yeah,
what's it, avatar, can figure out the best flight for you and book it while ordering you a pizza, phoning up the pizza place, and then
yeah,
you find out that all of those demos were completely faked and
yeah.
total vaporware.
Yeah, so I think there was even some research into this. So there was this behavior pattern with Alexa where people would get an Echo, they would experiment with it for a while, hit the limits, realize it's not as smart or as flexible as what they've been sold on, and then they just get conservative again. They just default,
Yeah,
and there's nothing there to tell them, hey, I can do this really, or like, oh, you can converse more freely now. So even now,
yeah,
if you applied an LLM to that system now and you could speak more freely to it, that conservatism has already set in. Oh, I know the limits of it. It's not ever going to meet my expectations of a human conversation.
yeah. That makes sense. And if
Yeah,
because yeah, it's got the same form factor. It's just a little cylinder
yeah,
that spies on you, and there's no way for you to discover from just looking at that cylinder that it can now do new things.
yeah. But you already know it's not smart. It has the appearance of smartness, but it actually isn't. And in a way, a dumb GUI that's very limited and structured is better because you know what you're getting.
Yeah, and if you look at a dumb
So,
GUI like Photoshop, you can do incredible things in that. And now there's
yeah,
been, well, you can now do clever imagery using AI type stuff. But then this goes to another theme. You lose control, don't you? You now get what the
yeah,
computer gives you. You don't get to control and make what you want to make.
yeah, yeah, indeed. So I guess I'm trying to understand at the moment like what advice I would give to an organization on that basis, right?
Yeah.
Like what does that actually mean in terms of the way you approach your products and your innovation? Um, so I guess it means things like don't try and be everything to everyone. Like this one agent to rule them all seems to be an incredibly silly idea that will very rarely work, and you won't be able to invest enough to make it work.
Yeah. I think there's doubt over whether that is ever going to be possible
Yeah, and I
with the
think that's
current
yeah.
technology, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a secondary reason for that, which is it's an infrastructure problem, right? You can't build things at the moment that would give a super smart agent, even if you had something that can go and book flights and buy pizzas for you. You we don't have the infrastructure to support the agent running around and looking at your bank account and querying your taxes and doing all that, right? All the interfaces are, I mean, yes, there are APIs, but effectively everything is a human-oriented interface.
Yeah. The stepping stones, I suppose you could argue,
Yeah.
people in the crypto world would argue that the stepping
Yeah.
stones are starting to be built there because that is where computers can interact with real world systems
Right.
without as much failure. Like you basically the interactions, the transactions are done right there in the system. It's
Hmm.
not a system that's a proxy for real world things happening, which is what
Yeah.
most software is, where
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
all then breaks down. I remember big clothing companies they cannot track returns of their clothes at all because there's no way for the computer systems to know what's been returned where or any of that
Mm,
sort of stuff. So they're
right.
just the data in all of their systems is wrong. And so if you're
Yeah.
trying to run inferences off it or make decisions off it, you can't. You need to
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Yeah.
double check against reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So a slightly different topics,
So
but
that.
similar, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
it's a stepping stones question though, isn't it? The
Hmm.
computer can't go and be that agent. But I remember doing research a few years ago, which was into like what people needed an automated system to do for them.
Mm,
And the sense that I got after multiple rounds of research was, right, people are expecting automation to mean a pretty smart intern who you
mm.
give a loose set of instructions to, and they won't do something stupid. And
It's
what
a
the
PA,
computers are, a PA, yeah,
right?
they
It's a
want
rich
a
person
PA.
having a very competent PA. That's what it is. Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And they
Yeah.
dream of the PA like in the movies. That's
Yeah.
what's being sold as well, where the
Yeah.
PA knows what you want before you even say it. And they're
Yes.
just, oh, yes, well, it's 12 o'clock on a Thursday. I looked at your diary and I've got the present for your husband because, blah, blah, blah. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? And
Yeah.
what the reality is that the automated system will just mess things up and break things. And then you'll have
Yeah.
to clean up a mess afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that some of the best writing about AI that I've read recently is talking about the fact that you're not going to get systems that can do induction. Like the real hurdle for intelligence is induction, right? And I believe that the current state of testing the LLMs is that unless they are trained to do a specific kind of pattern matching, they can't do abduction, induction, right? They can't make
Yeah.
intelligent
Abduction is
leaps.
not possible
Yeah,
for them at all. Yeah.
they can't make leaps about things that are similar and related, but that they haven't been trained on, which a PA would do, right? They'd know that this part of your life affects that part of your life, and they might double check something. Oh, like those kind of, they would make mental leaps that current state of AI, the transformer or LLM, simply cannot do, right? Between
Yeah.
these abstract pieces of information. And they
Yeah.
would
Because the
also,
LLM doesn't
yeah,
even look at the words you're using. It's all
yeah,
tokenized, isn't it? So
tokens. Yeah,
this
yeah,
is why they can't tell you how many R's are in strawberry because
yeah.
strawberry is token number 4,387. And then it's a nonsensical
Yeah.
question.
Unless there was a piece of a sentence somewhere that said the word strawberry has this many R's in it. That's the
Exactly.
only,
And it could just
yeah,
happen to find that.
yeah, yeah,
But then
yeah,
you've got to have probably thousands of those sentences in order for it to
yeah.
be statistically the
Right.
next thing that would be said.
So, okay, so we've established like the conversational interface is not the answer to everything. Like I think we know that there is something in future that might operate like a rich person's fancy PA, but we're not. We have so many fundamental barriers, even
Yeah.
barring the reliability or the intelligence of the system, that is probably quite far away or nigh on impossible to have a
Yeah.
personal assistant that's
And I
doing that.
think
So,
something there is that the people who love the concept of the technology maybe are
yeah.
underestimating how much trust people need to have in it, how
Yes.
and how little trust people have in computers at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. So that brings us nicely on to the next one, which I think is the reliability problem. And we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but I believe, again, I can't remember where I read this, but LLMs simply just, there's a point below, right, the curve, which they just won't go, right? You
Is this the
cannot,
temperature idea?
yeah, yeah, you
So there's
cannot
a
get them to be accurate no matter what you've set up
yeah,
all of the time about even on the things they have learned, right? You just can't do it,
yeah.
right?
Because if you do, they then are really pedestrian and they don't do anything special or interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right? So there are these
And
curves
there's a
that go
point,
downwards. Yeah,
and but it's a really small band of temperature, I think, from what I've
yeah,
seen, where then
yeah,
you hit this point where it just creates utter garbage.
yeah, yeah. So what I've been noticing with this sort of Gen AI thing is that like I just haven't seen this discussed enough. The use cases are all things that are human mediated, where unreliability is sort of allowed, right? It's
Yeah,
sort of okay that I can curate that image I'm generating or that sentence it's writing for me or whatever it is, right? Actually, most of the things that seem to be exciting on people's minds need unbelievable levels of reliability from, let's say, a deterministic type system.
Yeah.
And there is almost no margin of error. You know, like the conference I'm talking about is about finance that I'm going to do in a couple of weeks is finance oriented. It's like, well, I mean, like very, very, very slim error like margin here. Like no one wants their money screwed around with in any shape or form, right?
No.
So we, I know people are scrambling around trying to build RAG and trying to make the LLM reliable at certain things and better training or, you know, human
Yeah.
in the loop, that kind of thing. But it does strike me that that point is not well understood, and I'm trying to, I guess, in real time with you, summarize what that means in terms of a principle or an approach. Now, just to say, Maggie, who we touched on before, Maggie Appleton, had this idea of like breaking down the cognitive steps into smaller units of intelligence,
Yeah.
right? If you break it down, you're going to get more reliable things rather than asking too much of one system, you know?
Yes. So rather than one big black box and you say, hey, can you do this whole thing?
Yeah,
You instead need to do the what you'd see in, I suppose, accelerated expertise, I think is the name of the book, but like the cognitive task interview. And you
yeah,
break down, well, how do you get from there to there? And you're effectively making a standard operating procedure and then
yeah,
several black boxes doing each bit with a check at each stage to make sure
yeah.
it's not doing the stupid thing that it sometimes does at that stage.
Yeah, and maybe they've all had their own discrete sets of training, right? It's not a machine that's trying to do everything from a mega large data set.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of
But
smaller
of
data
course,
sets. I remember that was Maggie's thing as well, wasn't it?
yeah, of course, what that means is that there's human oversight of those cognitive steps, right? It can't just go away and magically build its own workflow, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, it might be able to suggest something, but we're not. I remember, actually, that's reminding me of something. I remember Samsung had this assistant. What was it called? They were trying to compete with Siri. Well, the name escapes me. And some of the guys that had developed Siri at Apple had moved on to Samsung and were trying to build something with them. And I'm going to guess this is like 7 or 8 years ago. They did this demo of how in future an AI was going to build its own cognitive software, right? So
Mm.
they broke down, I think the sentence was something like, um, I'm driving to my brother's house. They're having a party. Help me find out where to get a bottle of wine along the way, right? And then he was sort of in this talk. This is Klaus something. I'm so sorry, I've forgotten his name. Um, he was breaking down like all of the cognitive components underneath that sentence that you would need to go away and run queries. And kind of the idea was like our system based on Samsung's tech is going to kind of, we're going to innovate to the point where it will build its own kind of query engines that form the thing that will answer that sentence. Because it's the idea was like, there is no use case to be designed for here. The AI is going to need to make these leaps on its own. So effectively, every time you ask it something, it's kind of building its own answering engine filled up of mini cognitive machines in the background.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Very exciting idea. I'd be interested to know like if they've tried that with LLMs more recently. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've got diagrams of it somewhere.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
thing that I can't get past with that is, I mean, the LLM is Searle's Chinese room at
Mm,
scale, isn't it? It's a
yeah.
stochastic parrot that doesn't know
Yeah.
conceptually. It has no understanding of what that thing is. It's not linked to any sort of concept in its brain. You
Yeah.
say party, bottle of wine, right? And immediately that's conjuring imagery and
Yeah.
concepts in our brains. But in
Yeah.
an LLM, that's just token 484 and token whatever number.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just then predicting what comes next when you see those words. So yeah, I don't. There are very, very smart people working on it though. So
I'm
maybe they
sure.
know how to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I guess yeah, I'm trying to boil it down a little bit here. I think some just some ground truths about this. Our current approaches that are popular in the umbrella term AI are fundamentally uncertain and fundamentally unreliable. And almost every attempt to kind of make them give you the right answer is effectively a kludge or a hack.
Mm. Yeah.
Like this thing I watched recently, they were doing this parallel prompting. So for every prompt that was being sent to like a customer support agent, there were like 12 prompts in the background to like double check the output and query a separate database. And there was a bit of RAG in there as well. And it was just like really, really messy. But like just to be reliable about one answer was this massive, horrible, environmentally unfriendly, power hungry hack because you had to run
Right. Just
20
and
queries.
this is prompt engineering, isn't it? And the other thing which I've seen people
Yeah.
complain about, like this is
Yeah.
supposed to be this magic thing where you just ask it, but then it's like, oh no, you have to ask it
Mm.
very specifically in exactly
Yeah.
the right way with
Yeah.
like you're talking about all this background prompting going on as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what we're being sold.
No, indeed. So the question is, I suppose, is that reliability and this a standard approach to making the stochastic parrot actually give reliable answers? Is that coming anytime soon? I think is one big question on everyone's minds. Lots of approaches are being experimented with, but I would guess in a sense, we know that fundamental component is unreliable, but maybe there's some more efficient way of combining deterministic and non-deterministic approaches that might come soon, but we don't know exactly when.
Yeah.
Um,
Gosh, so we're coming back then to your question
yeah,
of let's imagine a company and they're
yeah,
asking you, how should we invest in AI?
yeah,
And I would say, I mean, my sense would be 99% of the time, the
yeah,
answer is don't, hold on, and wait. Because if somebody does figure out how to do that stuff you're describing efficiently,
yeah,
well, then you can copy it quickly.
yeah,
At the moment, we're in a world where people are trying to figure it out, and there's so many different possibilities.
yeah,
We can't know what's going to work. And if you want to invest in that world, then that's great. But the only time it's worth you investing in that world is if it's going to give you a significant competitive advantage. Touching on ideas from Wardley mapping here,
mm-hmm.
what we're dealing with is something that's in the novel slash custom build phases of evolution right now. I
Uh-huh.
think we're probably custom build ish, but I
Yeah,
think a lot of it's still quite novel, isn't it?
yeah,
And it is therefore going to be failing a lot. It's going
mm-hmm.
to be very expensive for you to figure it out, and it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take specialized experts. There are companies out there who are investing literally billions, tens of billions into figuring out how to make AI do stuff. Do you
Yeah,
think you can compete with that? Do you think you can beat them with whatever you're going to invest? Like, that's the first question.
yeah,
Because what your best bet is, if it's something that is just going to give you some efficiency gains, well, you're probably going to want to wait until it's through the product phase, until you're in the point where it's commoditized and it is now becoming a race to the bottom for price,
yeah,
so that you can get it at, you can just buy it off the shelf. At
yeah,
the moment, you can't buy AI off the shelf and use it in predictable ways.
yeah,
You have to put in a huge amount of custom work to make
yeah,
it do anything.
yeah.
Yeah, and so it's only worth it if it's going to give you a massive competitive advantage.
I do, yeah, I think I don't disagree, but I find that idea slightly in conflict with the idea of setting yourself some sort of vision, or not even a vision, possible visions,
Yeah.
right? Possible, like this is, in those future cone diagrams, right? Like you've got several different
Oh yeah,
directions
yeah,
this would
yeah,
go. And I do think without launching a product, it's cheap to experiment, actually, like with
yeah.
this stuff, you know?
Oh yeah. So
Um,
it's actually that's a better argument. So it's unless it is going to give you a competitive advantage,
yeah,
don't force it into production.
yes,
But if you want to have an innovation lab, then have people just scrabbling around having fun with it.
yeah,
Make a playground for this stuff and
yeah,
see what you can figure out. That's
yeah,
worth doing, I would say.
yeah,
But like the question is that the playground for you? Is that a sensible playground for your company? Or are there
yeah,
other playgrounds that will be more everybody is playing in that playground.
yeah,
So are you uniquely going to find more interesting things in that playground than everybody else?
Yeah.
Or is there a playground that you could be playing in that's more your topic of interest, that's somewhere where nobody else is playing and you're going to be the one to find something interesting?
Yeah.
I think that's a question for companies as well,
Yeah.
which is
I
hard to
think,
go against the popularity. We're
yes.
mimetic, aren't we? Everybody's looking at AI. That means it must be exciting. It must be where the next things are coming from. But there's so much more adjacent possible out there than just
Yeah.
Gen AI.
Well, I mean, that's even assuming we've got a good definition of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think to extend your thought there, like the middle management incentive to double down on stuff like that at the moment. In fact, if you're not doing it, who the F are you, right? Is sort of probably a position that a lot of people are in.
Yeah.
Um,
Which cycles back to where we started, isn't it? Which
yeah,
is your optimal choice may actually to be go and do something to go and play in a playground that no one else is playing in,
yeah,
but you probably can't do that at
yeah.
a
It's just
governance and management level. It's not
no.
not possible.
Or there needs to be some sort of, as we talked about, shell game being played. Like here is the fancy thing I'm telling you I'm doing, and there's the real thing over here.
Yeah.
Um, I I was trying to think through like what hasn't changed even in the face of all this potential change. And I
That's
guess
always
the
a good question, isn't it?
yeah, like I guess the thing that I keep coming back to, and I think is worth investing in, despite the fact it gets ignored most of the time, is understanding the needs. Like what if we had certain capabilities that we could act on reliably with a new piece of technology that came along, what problems would we actually be solving? Like for me, there's no loss in investing that if you're going to listen to what comes back. You know, which in most organizations, unfortunately, you know, user research is horribly ignored. But I
You've
guess
been binned off now because yeah.
yeah. But actually, like there are things that no matter what changes in the AI technological interface device landscape, your customer is always going, like let's just take finance. Your customer is going to have deep-seated human needs that don't really change, and you can
Yeah.
start to look at how a certain technology might address that need, even
Yeah.
if it's not possible today.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
it's really clear if you look at the way that the crypto space has evolved. It's mainly evolved through scams and
Mm,
nonsense. But if you look at the technology that's left behind, they're just replicating stuff that existed in normal finance for hundreds of years. And
yeah.
those fundamental needs haven't changed. There is now stuff which is you need somewhere to store money.
Mm,
You need a way to make transactions. You need a way to get insurance.
yeah.
These are things which have been around for hundreds of years, and they're just the form of it is changing. The protocols underlying how you do it is changing,
Yeah.
but the needs haven't changed.
No, and in fact, I would say it's not just that the needs haven't changed when they replicate, it's that they've been actively ignoring very, very, very fundamental needs. So, for example, these stories of people, you know, losing their shirt and their retirement money to crypto
Yeah,
because of a scammer when you don't have the protections that come with a government and a central bank insurance, you know?
yeah,
And you're kind of going, you've doubled down on the innovation and the potential freedom from so-called, you know, government oversight and tyranny or whatever, you know, whatever the libertarians are talking about these days.
yeah, yeah.
Actually, you did want that safety and you were happy for the technology to eject that safety. You just didn't know that that was a fundamental need you had until it all went wrong.
Till it went away. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Well,
Yeah.
speaking with people in the crypto space, there is that kind of belief that the banking system and the governments are fully broken and wrong and are going to crash
Mm,
and lose all of your money any day now. And
yeah.
the only way to survive, the only way to run your life is to be your own bank. Now you
Yeah.
can be in control.
Mm,
And they are classic innovators and early adopters who love, I don't know if they love, they're kind of trapped now in a world where they are having to be their own bank and do their own
mm,
governance and be paranoid all the time. And
yeah.
it's exhausting. And it's a
Yeah.
24-hour day job to be your own bank. And they're imagining, well, just at some point, everyone will want this.
Yeah.
But 90 whatever percent of people, They don't
Yeah.
want to be their own bank. I can't imagine there's anything worse. I
Yeah.
I don't. I remember doing research into banks and trust. Speaking about trust,
Yeah.
nobody trusts banks to have their best interests at heart,
Yeah.
but everybody trusts banks to have thick walls and to not
Yes.
accidentally lose your money.
I think the wall, let's, those walls are a Chesterton's fence, aren't they, for the crypto people?
Yeah,
You're trying to knock something down without really acknowledging why it was there in the first place.
yeah,
And that's a very, very, that fundamental need for safety has not changed.
yeah,
Um, so to bring it back to where we were, the investing in understanding those fundamental needs, if you're willing to listen to what comes back and it is true and, validated in some way, there's almost no loss in that process, right? Because you can learn things that will guide your future decisions, that will make you extremely competitive if you can serve people's needs better.
yes. I think we've talked about this on a podcast, me and Carissa,
Mm.
several times. I think there is a challenge to that because you can lose. You can invest
Mm.
money in going and doing user research, and what can come back is just ground. Well, you're not even getting ground truths. You're getting more information about the world, which you may not be able to do anything with. You just
Yeah,
may not have the capabilities in your organization or the positioning in the market or whatever it is to take advantage of what you've learned, in which
yeah,
case it's kind of useless knowledge.
yeah,
And but it's this thing where if you don't go and do that, well, you're probably going to do stupid things and waste money in other ways.
yeah,
But it doesn't feel like wasting money as much if you're building and shipping things. Whereas if you go and try to learn things and what you learn isn't really useful to you or doesn't feel immediately useful, I think if you've done
yeah,
lots of user research as well,
yeah,
there's always this demand, a hunger for actionable insights. And some insights are ones that you just have to
yeah,
sit with for a while.
yeah,
And it's not actionable today. It's something that, but it will shift how you think and it will
yeah,
shift how things emerge within the organization over the coming year.
yeah.
But you can't join it up deductively. It's,
No.
yeah, it goes
And
back to
also
that
you
need for abduction, doesn't it?
you can't tell when you're commissioning it or letting somebody do what they want, how lossy it's going to be. And I
Yeah.
think that's the problem, right? Is that coming back to uncertainty and the science things that we were talking about, you have to invest with a mindset of like, yeah, obviously I want to hire competent people and give them a good brief and give them the guidance and the help they need to make this work.
Yeah.
But you actually don't know what's going to come back. And I think one of the biggest pieces of research I ever commissioned as a product manager, it was all true what came back, but none of it was actionable. And I couldn't know what that was going to give us in future. And I had to be okay with that, you know? And
If you look back on that,
yeah.
did it then shift anything? Could you tie anything together?
I suspect it was the kind of research which would have taken years to pay off, and the company moved, the shape of the teams moved on before we could really think about it.
Yeah. And I think
And
that's interesting. That is the challenge with the idea that certain people are trying to make popular, which is researchers should be in charge of strategy, sort of thing.
yeah,
It is it depends what game you're trying to play.
yeah,
You can't play the short term inventing narratives to get money from shareholders game
no,
with researchers because researchers aren't good at that game.
no. I mean, I think I might have touched on my time in India recently, but the startup scene there is incredibly hungry and energized, particularly in Bangalore.
Cool.
Um, And I got a vision of user research, which might be frighteningly kind of stressful for a lot of today's European, user or Western user researchers. But it was really refreshing to see that customer obsession
Nice.
have such a big impact across the company. But the long-term stuff was being completely squeezed out
Hmm.
knowingly. Not there was a conversation about it, but it was like, I have this bunch of customers screaming at us, go find out what the shape of the product should be. You have a license, and people listened. People really, really listened, and it was fantastic in that regard. Anyway, I think I'm
That is
psyched.
exciting. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that I've just been putting the finishing touches to the course, which I told you about a little while ago, to
Mm,
this master multiverse mapping idea,
mm,
which it's like the culmination of everything. You've got the research to go and ask people and learn about the context thing on one side, and you've got the now we're going to do something and see
yeah,
how people respond on the other side,
yeah.
because you can't rely on one and not the other. I think you need to know what is, but you also need to know what if.
Hmm.
And what
Yeah.
is data is no good for answering what if questions, and what if data is no good for answering what is questions. You've got to
Mhm.
you've got to have both. Okay, so route one, which I think a lot of us tried, was, well, let's teach our whole organization to be really smart and understand how research works and how design works and how innovation works and experimentation works. And then when we all understand, we'll have maturity, and then things will be great. And I think we can say that that failed on
Mhm.
a catastrophic level.
Yeah.
And what we saw, I think, is this pressure for that fast, tactical, let's
Yeah.
get the product right type research. And I think over the long term, it can't deliver enough value to wash its own face.
Mhm.
And it's now kind of gone. The
Yeah.
research reckoning, as they said, has happened.
Yeah.
So that's no good. So what I found, and I think what other people have found, is you have to find a kind of Trojan horse where you do what the organization wants you to be doing, and
Mhm.
accidentally, apparently, it was
Mhm.
deliberate, but accidentally, by trying to figure out what it is that they want, you also then shift what they want by showing different signals, different information from the real
Mhm.
world. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the trick. You have to break out of the idea that you can do all of this stuff in a deductive, logical way, where
Mhm.
you give this information, this piece of evidence, and therefore this decision changes, and
Yeah.
therefore money is made, and you can trace all of that. And you
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
embrace that we're a lot messier than that. We're humans,
Yeah.
and
It's Connecting. Yeah.
Connecting stuff, yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hadn't really connected up, but yeah, it is that, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
you're shifting the conditions within the organization by exposing people to information that they hadn't seen and wouldn't otherwise see. And
Yeah.
that changes in intangible, impossible to measure ways how they
Mm.
then think and conceive of ideas, which then changes results that you get in intangible ways, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of exciting and frustrating in equal measures.
Um,
But you put little numbers on things as well. You have to have to fit into modern organizations, you have to create measures,
yeah.
signals, pivot triggers, that sort of thing. But they're always the tip of the spear, and there's a lot more behind, which
Hmm.
they're not expecting necessarily, but which
Yeah.
actually does the heavy lifting. I think that's the trick.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would that, I'm just trying to connect some dots here. What would that mean for an organization that has pressure to experiment and do things with AI at the moment?
Well, I've actually worked with a founder who was
Hmm.
trying to figure out a specific unique use case for UI, not UI, AI, Gen
Yeah.
AI in a conversational form.
Right.
I can't give too many details, obviously,
Yeah. Yeah.
but one of the things that came out is that they needed to go and understand the root psychology that
Yeah.
that customers would be coming to this for. And the other thing was I gave them frameworks like the multiverse mapping, signal stories option, probes. You can start by doing it at a small scale where
Yeah.
you're not trying to build it at scale on day one. You
No.
can use it with one person, and you can pretend to be the AI. You can
Yeah.
fiddle about with prompts yourself and then feed back the stuff to the person. You know, basically it's be the algorithm,
Yeah.
write out
It's
what you
yeah.
do, and then fake it
Yeah.
fake it, not to persuade people to give you money, but fake it to see how can we make this work,
Yeah.
one person at a time, then 10 people at a time, then
Yeah.
20 people at a time, then 100 people at a time, and you scale it when it becomes predictable enough to be worth scaling.
Yeah.
But the
Like,
thing that the founder, I mean, got back to me and said,
mhm.
Great progress in
Mhm.
many ways, but they still haven't found product market fit for a
Right.
thing which should be, I think, a bit of a no-brainer for something that would be an effective conversational medium.
Yeah. Yeah, it's my colleague Emily Sappington, my former colleague, talked about constantly having to tell people who are excited about AI the crawl, walk, run approach,
Yeah,
right? Like stop boiling the ocean, right? Like you really, whether we're talking about the assistant to do everything or the thing that can answer any question in your organization, which I will say, like, even organizations that are in a position to buy that technology, for example, Copilot from Microsoft, and have large repositories of interesting data with APIs and access to them, are saying no to that because the cost is prohibitive and it's
yeah.
so freaking unreliable. I've had major organizations that I've talked to are going, absolutely no way. We are not doing that anytime soon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Someone else I spoke to after UX London, where we were
Yeah.
both at, was one of the co-founders, I think, of Dualo, Dualo. Have you heard of them?
No.
So that is an LLM where they
Yeah.
say they've turned the temperature right down so that it
Mm.
doesn't hallucinate as much. But the guy told me they've sold their system into a bunch of companies who are now using it. And
Mm.
it's kind of your research librarian, is
Right.
the way that I read what he was saying. I
Yeah.
remain incredibly skeptical, but he was saying, look, people are paying us for this and they're using
Yeah.
it and they're getting results
Yeah. Well, yeah.
because it goes and trawls through all of this. I mean, companies, they've got so many things in the intranet and then loads in Confluence and loads in here and loads in
Right.
there. And this will go and look at it all, and then you can ask it questions and it will bring back some stuff
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
seem to be
maybe it
thinking
works.
it works.
Well,
Maybe
I
it
know
works.
somebody pointed out to me the other day that, like, where it's working, people may not be very public about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like if they crack some formula, maybe they keep well under the radar about some of the results
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
maintain that competitive advantage for a while. And I do know that I read somewhere that, like, the openness of AI research from, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago has almost completely disappeared.
Interesting.
Like
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that led to, transformer model, the like the freedom that AI researchers had, people are not as comfortable with that anymore, and they're not being allowed to do it. And that conversation on archive and places like that has sort of shrunk. And when people are finding something interesting, it's not necessarily making it very public yet.
Mm. Which,
Um,
going back to your core question, so talking to a particular company,
mm,
I think this comes back to, are you going to get really, realistically, a significant competitive advantage
mm,
by investing in AI at the scale?
mhm,
Because then, yeah, you might need to come up with your own personal way of doing it. But you've already put your finger on it. The way to get there is not to set an ambitious vision and try and brute force your way there, but to have
yeah,
a bunch of people crawling and
yeah,
tinkering with it to see, hey, what can we do with tiny little use cases?
yeah,
And
probing.
probing, yeah. And
Yeah.
if here's an idea also from the world of Kinevin, but one that's featured in my deck, which is, oh, I don't think I did feature this in the deck. No, this one is not in the deck. What, yeah, but it's a really cool way of working with this sort of thing. Let's say you've got 20 engineers sitting around and you want them to be tinkering with AI and figuring stuff out. Pair them up with customers from your actual
Yeah.
customers' companies at the moment and have them sit together and prototype something. Put them together with someone else, like someone from marketing or someone who's a grizzled systems thinker, someone who's more. So you want a keen, enthusiastic prototyper who's quick
Right.
at coming up with cool new stuff,
Yeah.
paired with a customer who's been taught how to speak with programmers, which
Yeah.
is much easier than teaching programmers how to speak with customers, and then pair them with an administrator or a systems architect type person who
Okay.
knows what's going to go wrong, and then have 20 of those teams go and come up with stuff. No
Yeah.
guidance, no nothing, just what
Brute
cool things
forcing.
can they come up, brute force.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
from that, some of it's going to be interesting and some of it's going to be worth continuing with. um,
Yeah.
and that's a way to quickly get variety. Because actually, we're at the stage now where if you want to innovate with this, you need many, many, many experiments
Yeah.
like loads of different ideas happening all at once because you
Yeah.
can't know what's going to work yet.
Yes, that's absolutely true. It's very much, I don't know if you know Omar's brute force architecture approach. I've written about it a few times.
Ah, no.
Yeah, so the one of the most famous architecture firms in the world, they have this very set and very unique process where it's a Dutch company. What's the dude's name? I've forgotten his name. Anyway, so what they do is that they do some research and some briefing. But then these architecture grads, like usually like very fresh to the trade, right? Very fresh. We'll get together in a group
Yeah.
with foam and hot wire, and they literally just go through hundreds of small scale shapes, like about
Okay,
this
yeah.
size.
Yeah.
And then Rem Koolhaas, I've just remembered his name.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've heard of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's the guy in charge of the company. He'll come round and they'll just start throwing models away. Not that direction, not direction, that direction. That's interesting. What can you do with that? And then there's another 100 prototypes out of hot wire.
Right. Got
Uh,
it. Yeah, yeah.
and I just think it's, yeah, it's a really, I mean, completely impractical in sort of product land in many ways to get that kind of volume. But
Well, is
it's
it? Is it?
the mindset. Maybe is it the mindset or is it a practical approach? I don't know. Yeah.
I think often, I think we've ended up in a world where a lot of people are trapped with needing to know what the vision is before they'll
Mm.
start doing anything. And
Hmm.
actually, but I've seen it as well. You can flip that around and you can just get to tinkering. It's
Hmm.
changing what you do. Um, Bringing back Ken Stanley, he would say that just randomness is
Hmm.
really inefficient. That's no good either.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what you want to go for instead is novelty and curiosity.
yeah,
And
yeah.
how do you determine that? Well, you can't do that with metrics, but people are
No,
good at knowing what's curious, what
yeah,
piques their interest. And so you let people follow what's interesting for them.
yeah.
Um, have you come across Tom Chi? I bet you have.
No, no, no.
Oh, you're gonna love Tom Chi. He's got a couple of videos online. He is the rapid prototyping guy that I share in my course. There's a couple of
Okay.
videos. He prototyped Google Glass,
Mm.
and there's a couple of experiments he did. His talks are fantastic. One was about what's it like to use a sort of, Tom Cruise in
Right.
Minority Report type display. And so he
Oh, mate.
simulates that
Yeah.
using a slide projector. Oh no, so like a projector that's projecting things onto a sheet
Yeah.
with then some bits of fishing wire that hook to chopsticks that press buttons on a keyboard. So he can kind of pretend to swipe the photos and it'll
Amazing.
like do the thing and change the pictures and do all that. And
Yeah.
what he learned is you actually can't comfortably work with your arms at this height for very long.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
hands are above heart level. It becomes really, really uncomfortable after a few minutes. And he said, well, unless you're Tom Cruise, you can't really work like this. Somebody was at one of his talks who'd been working on Minority Report and said Tom Cruise couldn't do it either. It took them days to film those scenes because he
Yeah.
kept having to have breaks after just a few
Yeah,
minutes
yeah.
of doing this
I'd
stuff.
heard that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's one. And he managed to prototype that and learn all of this stuff about real use
Yeah.
in an afternoon by just rigging something up that taught him what he wanted to learn. He
Yeah, yeah.
prototyped the Google Glass headset by
Hmm.
taking a piece of wire and some modeling clay, which was the right weight and shape for the dimensions for the components that they have to do, and then
Yeah.
just making tons of different models and wearing them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he learned from doing that that if you all of those VR headsets with the weight on the front, you can only wear them for a short time because it puts weight
Mm.
on the bridge of the nose. What you
Yeah,
have to
which
do
is
is
a bit
balance
fun.
it on the
Yeah.
ears, and then
Yeah.
then you'll be okay. And
Yeah.
so, and he did that again in an afternoon. And it's this thing you
Yeah.
can actually try many, many more variations quickly if you're willing to let go of fidelity or willing to let go
Mm.
of certainty or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Which links me to two other things. Um, so there's a guy called Vaughn Tan who
Hmm.
I think you'd like his book as well. It's called The Uncertainty Mindset. And he
Hmm.
writes a lot about uncertainty and how there's different kinds of uncertainty, and uncertainty is different from risk, which is all stuff I'm sure you've come across before. But he's gone and looked at how innovation happens in the top restaurants in the world. So
Mm.
they're like multiple Michelin star experimental kitchens, like Noma was, like
Yeah.
Grand Tachat's, whatever that was called, Alinea, and
Yeah.
these and the Fat Duck.
Yeah.
How do they balance these two things? Because they need
Yeah.
to innovate and come up with something that nobody's ever had before, and
Yeah.
they also need to deliver it perfectly at scale
Yeah. Yeah.
and under budget, to make it affordable.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really interesting sort of
Interesting. Yeah.
lessons from that. You don't create a special innovation lab. You create space around the edges where the people
Mm.
who like innovating, who like going through things that fail over and over again until they come up with something that works,
Mm.
you just have them doing it around the edges and
Mm.
run lots of experiments.
Mm.
What if we ferment this inedible gourd for 6 months in 4 different types of vinegar? Does it does something come out that's interesting? And then after 6 months, you taste those. That's horrible. Well, that was six
Yeah.
months gone. But
Yeah.
you can do all that. But one time in 100, wow, that's something I've never had
Yeah.
before. That's amazing. Now we can do something with it. And they're
Yeah.
they're doing that sort of experimentation with stuff.
So I had a conversation with a very interesting ex-Amazon person recently who was talking about why Google is failing. And one of the theory, failing at, I shouldn't say failing as a company, but failing at sort of launching products, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Compared to Amazon. And the main thesis was there is a big separation between the people that have an idea and the people that launch an idea. And at Amazon, those are the same people. There's this incredibly lossy process, right? So they're not I mean, I'm sure they are prototyping, but their lossiness is the PRFAQ, right?
Right. Yeah.
Only 1 in 100 ideas that makes it through this incredibly arduous, argumentative process of whether that idea is right or sensible or has some like key business benefit or vision or solves a real user need. 1 in 100. And he actually said it might be even less than that. The ratio
I
might
could
even
believe it.
be like maybe possibly 1 in 200 actually makes it. And I'm talking about even behind the scenes products as well, right? I'm not talking about just the things that consumers see.
Yeah.
Only a very, very small number of those make it through that arduous process. So that's where their lossiness is happening. But also that, if you think of that life cycle in 6 months to a year, lots and lots of conversations to see something into reality and actually testing it, those are the same people. And he was sort of
Yeah.
saying, Google is a place where people who have interesting ideas are not very good at launching them, right? And they haven't had that rigor. And so there's a disconnect between things like X and research and real life consumer products.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's also linking
Yeah.
with, have you read the book How Big Things Get Done?
Nope.
No, you'd like that too. Um, what what you're describing in Amazon sounds like what this guy
Hmm.
reflects on and says is the best way to do things, which is think slow and act fast.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating book. I thought it's about mega projects. It's about like huge infrastructure things and buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's not going to be useful for us. It's not going to be interesting. But actually, it
Yeah.
was really good, and I think it jives with lots of stuff that
Hmm.
we talk about as well.
Yeah.
And one of the insights is, yeah, that PRFAQ process, that is a way of thinking slowly, of going
Yeah.
into the details of the project in imagination, in model form,
Yeah.
in computer simulation, in small scale experiments where you do it by hand for a small number of customers. You
Yeah.
do all of that for months to
Yeah.
build the confidence that says, yeah, actually that is worth the vast amount of money it's going to take to launch the thing. And
Yeah.
most of the time you won't get there, but sometimes you
Yeah.
will. So that's one way to do it. There's lots of great ideas in that book. But one of
Hmm.
the things that he points out you come up against is politics, because
Hmm.
that's how you get successful products. But often the other factor that's going on is politically, that's very hard to justify. And
Hmm. Yeah.
politically, it's much better to just say, there's the idea, boots on the ground, start digging, make a
Yeah.
hole. And once you've made a hole, sunk cost bias is on your side. Now you've got to
Yeah.
keep throwing resources at it until it's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think slowly and you find a problem with it, it
Yeah.
can die, and then you don't get to do it. And it reminds he references the Pixar planning process, which I'm sure
Right.
you know about as well.
Yeah.
You make the whole movie 8 times in little
Yes.
pencil sketches with voiceovers before you actually
Yeah.
employ the animators, because employing the animators is outrageously expensive, whereas
Yeah.
making more pixel sketches, it takes time, but
Yeah.
it's relatively cheap.
Yeah.
And I've certainly seen this with design projects. It's through doing multiple iterations cheaply that you get to the point where you're like, now we know exactly what to build. Whereas if you
Hmm.
jump in the first time, you get to the end of the project, it's a disaster, but you're like, well, now we know what to do differently. Now we know
Yeah.
what we should have built.
Yeah.
Well, the Pixar planning iteration is the way to know what you should
Yeah.
have built before you actually build it.
You know what? I think this is making me think of the principle that perhaps underlies these approaches to times of change that we've been touching on around the edges, which is focus on the machine that makes the machine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the shiny object, the magpieing, is always the thing, right? But what we're talking about are generalized approaches to prototyping, having ideas, testing them in different ways, volume, right?
Yeah,
Increasing the volume of ideas, increasing the way certain groups of people collaborate,
yeah,
that maybe you haven't tried before, that your organization doesn't even let you do, right? Actually just building those capabilities out rather than focusing on a vision or a conversational interface or those kinds of things is what we're
yeah.
actually talking about, right? The machine that makes the machine.
Yeah. So then you're looking as a company leader making these investment decisions, how can you
Yeah.
invest in setting up the conditions that you can have a team who can come up with something that you weren't expecting? Not
Yes.
how can you have the idea to give the team a vision to chase after, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a different way of operating, isn't it? One
Yeah.
more idea from that book is the concept of expirere, I think he says, which is you either need experience or you need experimentation. So
Huh.
if you've done something dozens of times before, well, then you know a lot of a lot of the problems you're going to encounter. You can make a decent plan, and you're probably going to do all right. If you
Yeah.
haven't done it before, you're going to have to experiment, and you're going to have to put
Yeah.
energy into that and the iteration, and
Yeah.
treat
Yeah.
it
Absolutely.
like the architect making hundreds of tiny
Yeah.
shapes and deciding which ones to continue with.
Yeah. I read once about how DARPA works, and it was I don't know if you've read much about that. It was fascinating, the idea of it's all about picking investments. Like the people that go work there have a portfolio, right, of science projects, technology projects that they're kind of like going, yes, I think this is worthy of money. And there's a very rigorous process about kind of not overdoing it,
Hmm.
having a portfolio of bets with kind of known speculation within them and not trying to get too lost in the details, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, and not getting too involved yourself, right? Going, right, we're going to, you invest, DARPA investor X are going to go out and find your portfolio. And it's not about you trying to necessarily be really clever about what the future is, and instead having a different set of criteria about what you fund. And I'm starting to remember
Okay.
the details, but it
I'd
was,
be guessing they'd be want to. I mean, some things that pop up straight
mm,
away are, well, when you're dealing with uncertainty, a barbell strategy.
yeah,
So some
yeah,
stuff, a bunch of stuff that's certain, and then some absolutely wild speculative stuff. What you don't
yeah,
want to be doing is the middle zone,
right,
which would be
yes,
what everybody's doing with AI, the
yeah,
chatbot, the co-pilot, that sort of thing. No, go completely wild for stuff that you couldn't possibly think would be useful,
yeah,
and some of it might pay off.
yeah,
That'd be one thing, and the other would be diversification. So cover more
yeah, yeah.
potential possibilities.
That, and
Don't
not,
focus. It's
yeah,
actually when there's so much obsession with like focus, we must focus.
yeah,
Actually, at times of huge uncertainty, focusing is the worst thing you can do, because how can you know where to focus?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah. We should probably wrap up.
We should. It's been a good long session. So yeah, I think we've solved your talk now.
I've definitely been able to crystallize a lot of the thoughts. So yes, Romania, I'm coming.
Yes, that's good. I'm looking forward to hearing how that goes.
Yeah,
But yeah,
nice.
thanks for another wonderful and wide-ranging conversation with lots of references for people to follow down rabbit holes.
Lots of those. But yeah, it's been really useful. You always give me far too much to read.
Well, likewise, I'm gonna have to go and study up again. But yeah, no, it was good, and let's do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.